If I hadn't picked up my wife, she'd still be lying out on the street. I supported you while you just lounged on the couch. Marcus slammed his laptop shut so hard the coffee mug jumped. 3 years. 3 damn years since he'd found Brielle shivering outside that Phoenix bus station, clutching a torn backpack like it held her entire world, which, back then, it probably did. Now she was sprawled across their leather couch, the one he'd worked double shifts to afford, scrolling through her phone while some reality show blared from the TV. The same position she'd been in when he left for work that morning, and the morning before that. "Babe, we're out of those fancy crackers again," she called without looking up, her voice carrying that casual expectation he'd grown to despise. Marcus stared at the pile of bills on his desk. Rent, utilities, her credit card statements, all his name, all his responsibility. The accounting firm had been good to him, but not good enough to support 2 people indefinitely. He remembered that night vividly, how she'd looked so small, so broken. Her story about losing her job, getting evicted, having nowhere to go, it had torn his heart apart. What kind of man would he be if he just walked away? The irony wasn't lost on him now. He'd saved her from the streets, but somehow she'd made their home feel like a prison. "Maybe you could look for something part-time?" he'd suggested last month. Her response had been a masterclass in deflection, sudden tears about feeling pressured and not supported emotionally. Marcus grabbed his jacket. The evening air in Phoenix still held summer's bite, even in October. He needed to walk, needed to think away from her presence that seemed to fill every corner of their apartment. His phone buzzed. Tyler, his buddy from college, asking about drinks this weekend. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd said yes to anything social. Every dollar went toward keeping Brielle comfortable. Every free moment was spent listening to her complaints about their neighbors, her boredom, her need for just a few things from the mall. When had caring for someone become suffocating? When had love turned into resentment? He kicked a discarded soda can, watching it skitter across the parking lot. 3 years of this. 3 years of being the only adult in their relationship. The breakthrough came Tuesday morning, though Marcus wouldn't recognize it as such until later. Brielle was in the shower when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter, a text from someone named Derek. "Last night was incredible. When can we do it again?" Marcus froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips. His brain struggled to process the words, rearranging them like puzzle pieces that refused to fit. Another message popped up. "Your husband working late again tonight?" The mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the tile floor. Coffee splattered across his work shoes, seeping into the leather he'd spent an hour polishing the night before. "Marcus, you okay out there?" Brielle's voice drifted from the bathroom, followed by the shower shutting off. He stared at the phone screen, screenshot reflexively taken before the messages could disappear. Evidence. Proof that his growing suspicions weren't just paranoia born from exhaustion and frustration. The woman he'd rescued, supported, loved unconditionally, she'd been living a double life while he worked himself ragged to keep their world afloat. The confrontation happened Thursday evening, 3 days after the text messages. Marcus had spent those days watching Brielle with new eyes, cataloging the lies that rolled off her tongue like rehearsed lines. How had he missed it before? The way she avoided eye contact when discussing her day, the elaborate stories that didn't quite add up, the sudden interest in girls' nights that always happened when he worked late. "We need to talk," he said, setting Derek's messages on the coffee table between them. Brielle glanced down, and every drop of color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked exactly like the scared woman he'd found at that bus station 3 years ago. "Marcus, I can explain." "Don't." His voice cut through her starting excuse. "Don't insult both of us with lies." She tried tears first, then anger, then bargaining. The full emotional playbook she'd been using to manipulate him for years, all deployed in desperate succession. But Marcus felt nothing except a strange calm. He'd expected rage, heartbreak, something dramatic. Instead, he felt like a man finally waking up from a long, exhausting dream. "I saved you," he said quietly, "and you repaid me by turning our home into a lie." "You don't understand," Brielle said, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "I felt trapped, suffocated. You work all the time and I'm just here. Derek makes me feel alive again." Marcus almost laughed. Even in confession, she was making herself the victim. You felt trapped in a home I provided, eating food I bought, wearing clothes I paid for, while I worked myself sick to give you everything you wanted. It wasn't supposed to happen. Derek and I, we just connected. For how long? She hesitated. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of coming home to her kisses, her thank yous for groceries, her complaints about being bored. 6 months of being the fool who believed he was building something real. I want you out, he said simply, tonight. The tears stopped immediately, replaced by calculation. You can't just throw me out, I live here too. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her the research he'd done. The lease is mine, everything in this apartment is mine. Legally, you're a guest who's overstayed her welcome. She stared at the screen, understanding dawning. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. 2 hours later, Brielle was gone. She'd packed the same torn backpack she'd arrived with, plus a suitcase he'd bought her for the vacation they'd never taken. Derek apparently was out of town and couldn't help immediately. Marcus stood in the sudden silence of his apartment, expecting to feel empty or lost. Instead, he felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed. Tyler again, asking about weekend plans. This time, Marcus typed back, yes, definitely yes. He walked to the window overlooking the Phoenix skyline, the city lights stretching toward mountains he'd forgotten were beautiful. For 3 years he'd been so focused on carrying someone else's weight that he'd forgotten how it felt to stand on his own. The irony struck him as he poured himself coffee in a new mug. Brielle had been right about one thing. She would have been better off if he'd never picked her up that night. But not for the reasons she'd implied. She would have been forced to learn independence, to build her own strength instead of feeding off his. And he would have been free to find someone who saw his kindness as a gift to cherish, not a weakness to exploit.